Good afternoon. How are you? The weather's a little bit better. According to Thomas Jefferson, it's 85 degrees and we have 78 miles an hour of wind, although right now it's still. And it was a little overcast, but the sun is out now as the evening approaches. So that's the weather, what it's like here. Hope it's nice where you are. Be careful because the heat is quite deceiving. The last several days there have been a lot of things going on. We haven't discussed them because we focused on the debate. I'll mention it again, but let's talk about the Supreme Court, because on Monday it is possible, some would say likely, but I say possible and I'll explain why. It is possible that the court will decide whether or not Trump, as president or former president, has immunity from prosecution up to and including shooting somebody in Times Square, ordering members of the military to execute someone on his behalf. Now, that's a preposterous notion, but that's the way it was framed by his own lawyers when it was argued before the D.C. Court of Appeals. Now, the Supreme Court ends its session on Monday, and it has several decisions that are anticipated, and one of them is that they could kick it over to the next session, which means when that session begins in October and runs to June, there wouldn't be a decision that whole period. Obviously, such a patent tactic would inure to the benefit of Mr. Trump, because his entire strategy is delay. And while some of my friends and colleagues and people I respect want to give credit to the Supreme Court, the Gang of Six can't be ignored. They vote lockstep, no matter what the law is, no matter what the facts are, in any way that is helpful to the MAGA agenda and to Trump personally. That's it. That's my operating premise. I'm glad to be proven wrong, but I don't think I will be. And I am upset that anybody gives succor to the misconduct of this Supreme Court, knowing it's the last word on the law in this country, and is so transparently ignoring the notions of how we decide a case by precedent, the clear meaning of the text, and so forth. Now, right off the bat, the Supreme Court has made a decision about the rioters, and it's informative to go over it because the 1,400 people who were prosecuted, quite a number of them are affected by this decision, but that number is not even close to the universe of people in this situation. There are about 25 or 27 people who could be affected by this decision. But this decision provides as follows. The rioters can't be found to obstruct or impede an official proceeding unless, and the name of the defendant in this case, appealing it, is Fisher, unless Fisher, in this case, impairs records or other objects. Now, the statute has two prongs, and the second prong says, otherwise, the defendant otherwise obstructs, influences, or impedes any official proceeding or attempts to do so. Now let's go to the first prong. To my way of thinking, and to the D.C. Court of Appeals way of thinking, and to, you'll get a kick out of this, Barrett, who wrote the dissenting opinion for herself and two liberals, said, look at the English. There was a proceeding going on by appearing and trying to take over the Capitol and taking over the Capitol and forcing everyone to run from the chambers. That is affecting the records of the proceeding because they could not be considered because you made it impossible for the government to do business. But even if you don't buy that, the second provision is 100% because it says otherwise obstructs, influences, or impedes any official proceeding or attempts to do so. Certainly, Fisher and others satisfy that second provision. Now, the decision says, that is the Supreme Court decision by Gorsuch, obviously not a bleeding heart, and Roberts joined that number, and and so forth. The surprise is Jackson, thought of as a liberal, joined the majority. Isn't that something? And Barrett, who's normally thought of with the majority, joined the dissent and wrote the dissent for herself and Sotomayor and Kagan. So it's a very interesting decision that way. Now, how in the world did Gorsuch, who has championed the plain English of the text, and if it's satisfactory, you do what it says, and he concedes, it appears, to cover the conduct, but he thinks it went too far, and that's not right. And you have to look at it in other things. And they try to say that the first section limits the second section. Now I'm listening to myself and I'm thinking maybe I sound too much like a lawyer, but I apologize if I got down in the weeds too quickly. But a simple way to look at it is, why would you have two provisions if they didn't say different things? Why would you say a second provision was limited by the first without saying it was limited by the first? So that's the kind of weasel-worded stuff that happens when you lie about what you're doing, which is that you claim to be liberal and protecting a defendant from a false charge, when in fact what you're doing is you're actually encouraging and supporting and helping to affect the misconduct. Now, I'm hopeful that when these go back to the trial court, what the trial court will do is have a hearing and say, oh no, I think the government did fine here. That you did A, B, and C, and for both prongs of 1512, C1 and C2, that's the section in the code, for both those sections, C1 and C2, the government satisfied its claim. And I hate to say it because Barrett is not my cup of tea or anything else, but you read her opinion, it's very clear, it's written very nicely, and she even says at one point how the majority didn't said that Congress didn't anticipate that, and she made a remark to the effect of, oh my, Congress didn't anticipate there'd be an effort to storm the Capitol. Imagine that. And so, and she said a couple of other things. She talked about the Supreme Court taking language that is how you know, it's like shorthands on how you analyze a textual question in a statute. And she said it was sort of like taking a hammer to put in a screw. So and a very smooth opinion. So it makes you want her to be on our side. Now Jackson, there's nothing wrong with her writing. She was just dead wrong. I don't know what she was thinking. I'm very surprised because she was ballyhooed as the liberal member of the court. I mean, most liberal among the liberals, at least to my reading. So that's what the Supreme Court was up to. Shifting gears to other trials, Menendez, the senator from New Jersey, who's on trial in New York, I think he's been on trial for 7 weeks. The government just rested, and now they're going to proceed to the defense, which most basically, to save you a lot of trouble, is based on his views that I didn't know what my wife was doing. I didn't know about these gold bars, cold cash, and a luxury car that was for him that he drove. And money was found in his clothing in the closet, as were the gold bars, by the way. So I predict a pretty quick conviction for him. It's sad because I do remember at the early point of his career, he fought corruption. That's how he made his name before he moved up the political ladder to be a U.S. senator and to be chairman of a powerful committee. So that he abused. There's something about the job, the place that transforms people. And I know people have worked in his office and so forth. So it's sad and depressing. But there's something rotten about blaming your wife for something, even as a tactic to avoid responsibility yourself. It puts her in a peculiar position. The most amazing thing would be they put her on the stand and she says, he didn't do it, I did it all. Possible. hopefully doesn't do it. That would be, well, I guess as low a practice ethically as any we've seen, given the Trump era, if you will. The era of error, when truth is a casualty, where the means justify whatever ends suit you, and that's what he's doing, in my opinion, in this case. The reaction after the debate, it strikes me, and again, it's early. I may have said this before, but when I worked on the Hill and I worked with others on defending the impeachment of Clinton, our point of view was that what he did was terrible, but it wasn't an impeachable offense. And there were precedents for that point. People could disagree, but that's what we were saying. And what I found is when something happened that was sensational in the room, or one of our members from the House Judiciary Committee ran out of the room, like Barney Frank did, and man, he really nailed it. And so it was very productive what he was doing, which I assume was all part of the plan. As a special counsel involved in the proceeding, I was there for all these things. But the thing about it was it took like 2 or 3 days to get a reaction to know what people thought. Now, the preliminary reaction I'm getting is sympathy for Biden. Now, those who are the professional politicians, they just wanted to bring the House down and put somebody else in. And maybe they always thought that about this election. And Biden hasn't stopped the bleeding, but the combination of sympathy by many, the voters, and overreaching by the professional political class, I think is working somewhat to Biden's advantage, and that the most common statement I hear is, I would vote for anybody other than having Trump take over our government and destroy it. It's pretty much where they are. Now, Biden has managed to have a successful rally the next day after this, which has raised questions that really should be answered, have to be answered, I think. Not for me, but to be above the fray and to have credibility that was a once-over event, what happened at that debate. And people will never be completely convinced, but I think something has to be done about that. And there is a story to be told. Woodward was on with Ari Melber the other evening, and he was asked what his question as a reporter was. And it was, what went wrong? Something went wrong. What was it? Now, if you look at these things the way I do, the evening of the debate, Biden had no makeup on. The next day at the rally, he did have makeup on. I think that's fine, because with those lights, your entire face washes out if you don't do something. But it did wash out for that reason during the debate. He chose where he stood on the stage, or his campaign did. I don't know why. But he didn't seem to know, hey, there are cameras here. And he didn't look as if he knew where to look. And so as a result, he looked unfocused. And I guess he was. And sometimes, I said this the other day, he had this wan look. And it was not understandable. It was like he was hearing these accusations for the first time. And when they stirred his Irish, he had a better response, although he was difficult to understand sometimes. But other times, he just looked on as if this was the first time he was ever hearing it. So I think that deserves a Q&A for the purposes of the campaign, like I underscored Eisenhower once had to do because of his genuine heart problems. Now, anybody Biden's age has got to pay attention to his body. He's going to have good and great days. He's going to have bad days. And the question is, was that debate that? Well, the rally the next day, short period of time, says something. And I don't think, although they had teleprompters at the rally the day after the debate, I don't know if that was it, because his voice was strong. I've always described him as having only two voices, shouting and whispering. And he was shouting, but it was a rally. I have no problem with that. So the insiders don't like what they saw, and a lot of the public do. And $14 million was raised between, I think it was 11 o'clock and midnight. I don't know what else has been raised since. Now, who is saying what? Joe Scarborough, who's on MSNBC, claimed to be a friend to Biden, talked to him, and then went on the air and put him down. That's not a friend. I think when you have access like that, which is personal, which he described it that way, you don't abuse it. And it's not enough to tell someone, you told me this, and I'm now going to use it. That's not good. And Scarborough's wife, who was on with him, said that she was going to stand by Biden. She wasn't ready to give up on Joe Biden. And you would think that Joe would either have kept his mouth shut or said something soothing like, well, we're going to have to wait and see. And, other than going forward with the warrior horse we have, however compromised he may be by age, that's our best play. That's our best political play. Yes, it runs the risk that maybe there's something we don't know, and it could happen, and it could upend the whole thing. Isn't that life? That's what life is about. You're going along fine, and then you find, in the worst case, some kind of cancer or disease. You have a job, and not because of you, the company is in the red all of a sudden, and it has to do RIFs, reductions in force. So we have these things that we have to pay attention to. Now, Biden did something else that I thought was useful on Friday. In Alaska, and in part, I think, to offset the drilling he's allowed, he's preserved 26 million acres of land from development in Alaska. So, and let's finish up with a Supreme Court case. The Supreme Court has entered a ruling that basically says it doesn't have to follow the conclusions of the various agencies, think EPA, and that courts instead can make those rulings. That's one of the biggest problems we have now. We have judges that can't find their hindquarters with both hands making complex decisions about things that affect us all, including the agency work, whether it be the environment or a whole number of other things. And this Supreme Court says that, 6-3, by the way, shouldn't come as a surprise. The Supreme Court is in a rush of the 6 people to dismantle the protections that go back to Teddy Roosevelt and before that, their own party leader. They go back to Lincoln, they don't care. They go back to the original Constitution, they don't care. That's what we're here for. We're here to fight these people because they would take away our freedom. They would take away our future. These people don't deserve to be given a moment's air, and that may be about the second debate. When a person takes the stage and doesn't answer questions and deflects and lies about everything else, do we have to have a debate to allow him to do that? There are people who say you can't debate Trump, not because you can't, but because the conditions are never controlled sufficiently to have a real debate, a real discussion. So that's what I got to say on my 85-degree day out here in the Cathedral of Trees. And I hope tomorrow I'll be able to do the same. Bye-bye.